Art Ciocca would always say that there's two ways to live life. One is as a creator and one is as a harvester. And if you can choose, always be the creator. That doesn't mean you never harvest, but your life approach is to be a creator. And that's how you behave. That is the core of what we're trying to teach. Welcome back to Prosper, everyone. I'm your host, Andreas Widmer, joined, as always, by my colleague, Rebecca Teti. Today, I'm delighted to bring you our first repeat guest on Prosper, our colleague and our friend, Luke Burgis. He's an entrepreneur in residence here at the Bush School of Business, which is home of the Ciocca Center, the entrepreneurship center I direct, where innovation meets personal vocation.
Luke is also the author of Wanting and the director of the new Clooney Project, which is a multifaceted project to get members of the three cities, Jerusalem, Athens, and Silicon Valley, to talk to one another. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more in segment 2. But today, at least in the first episode or first segment, Andreas, we're going to flip the script a little bit, because two reactions that we get from our audience all the time and repeatedly are, one, I'd like to hear a little bit more about Andreas's story, and two, tell us more about what the Ciocca Center even is. And so I invited Luke to come back and help me interview you, Andreas, at least in segment 1.
Jumping on me, Luke, huh?
I'm normally not on this side of the podcast asking the questions. I don't know if I know what I'm doing, but I'll try my best.
We'll muddle our way through.
Yeah, and we're having this conversation just a few days after we learned of a new pope, a new Holy Father, who I might add, in my opinion, seems to look a lot like your former spiritual father, John Paul II. He's got
it
about him. It's uncanny.
I said that, and other people said I was crazy saying that. But when you see him, that chiseled face and the friendliness in it, the smile, I think he looks like JP2.
Yeah, and most importantly, he has a Midwest accent like yours truly. That's the thing. Exactly. So, Andreas, we haven't talked a lot about the Ciocca Center on this podcast, and I showed up here in DC at least a couple of years after it started. So I wasn't around to witness the founding of the Ciocca Center. I've heard many stories about it, but I'd love to just hear from you how this whole thing came about. Take us way back, go back as far as you need to bring us to the formation.
As you know, Luke, all good things start with a beer, because you and I, remember,
Yep.
We met over a beer, and Andrew Abel and I met over a beer. He read The Pope and the CEO, and when he was a marketing professor here in the economics and business department, and he read the book and started to teach with it, and then reached out to the publisher and said he'd like to meet the author. And we actually, I was telling him, well, I can't meet right now. I'm in Rome right now. And he says, well, I'm in Rome. And so Andrew and I met in the Swiss Guard barracks. I was helping out in the barracks and he was there. And so we met, let's say, over a couple of beers or so. And at the end of that conversation, he's like, look, I have this vision of building a business school, and I'd love to have you be a part of that and help me. And with this book, this is the kind of idea we want to implement or create a structure around. And so I told him that that's actually, I never really taught before. I don't have a doctorate. I don't have a PhD. I'm just, a hustler. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an old sales guy, entrepreneur. And so, but I got involved in this on this side of, to me, this is a startup. Right? This is it's like any one of my startup companies. You come in and the other person, in a sense, has the big idea, and I'm jumping in trying to make this work. I came in with some baggage, though, because back in the genesis of the whole thing is two things, really. The first thing is, most people know the story. I made and lost a lot of money in my life. The biggest loss, I was with FTP, and we that was a beautiful thing. Then the second company was Dragon Systems. And there we sold for $600 million a company to what turned out to be a fraudulent buyer. and it was the classic fraud. Fraud is very simple. It's just, consistent lying. And I was surprised in how easy it happens. And this company was many billions of dollars big, and it just like cratered, and then poof, everything went away. And so I had to ask myself, going through, I lived the American dream. I fell totally in love with this capitalist system, and I had to ask myself at that point: is this an intrinsically evil system or not? You hear it about it all the time. And I had to ask myself, can I be a Catholic capitalist? Now, mind you, I don't like the word capitalism. Can I be a free market Catholic, right? And so instead of going all back to school, what I did is I did two things. One is I took over a company, a subsidiary of the Monitor Group, which is the Harvard Business School strategy group, like Michael Porter and these kinds of theories. And the other thing is I went back to school, to seminary school, actually, to learn, to study ministry and theology. And out of it came this writing that I did, which I used to call in the beginning, that I called it my faith in capitalism, faith in capitalism. And so I gave that this document, this paper, made the rounds, and one of the people who saw it was a guy called Art Ciocca, who I was introduced to by Bob Allard. You all know that Bob Allard, the best connected person I know in the world. And this Art Ciocca came to me and said, "Look, this is exactly. I went to a school. I won't name it, a Catholic school that I'm a big donor to." But they're not convinced that you can be a free market, that the business is a force for good. And so why don't you and I get together and convince this school? And we did, and they kicked us out of there in no time. It was a total failure, total misfire. We go there, I talk about, why I think the free market is a good fit with Christianity, with Catholicism, and the market economy and stuff like that. They basically kicked us out before we did 2 seminars with them, and it just no fire.
But Andreas, before you don't give that too short shrift, because I love this part of the story, actually, because you and Art did something very interesting with this group, and they actually saw your point. The truth is that it was successful, and then there was a default back to factory settings.
It's part of how I teach. We still do it today. Every year at CUA is every student starts a business, because I can't argue with you about business if you don't start. It's like arguing about love if you've never been in love. Then you see it in a utilitarian way and not other directed. So what we did is, and Bob Allard actually helped with this. His company was in the background. Art and I go in there and inspire, we had 20 of these professors from that university. And we said, hey, what would you create to fix a problem in your community, in your environment, in your university? Remember, this was in the early 2000s. And they would come up with ideas. And we said, let's do an app for this, back when I thought apps were still cool. And so as they talked and they created this, we had developers in the background starting to create mock products, right? And this started to develop, and we immediately could give them something to develop this further. And I wanted them to catch the bug, to understand that this is about a product. This is about other directedness. How may I help you? And they loved it. And by the end of the week, they had some functioning product and were totally over the moon. And then we came back and said, now, you haven't even talked about profitability yet. Now, why are you saying that business entrepreneurs, business starters and owners are, quote, selfish bastards who only think about money? Here you are. You haven't even thought about that. Can't you now, with this empathy, see that that this is not primarily exclusively focused on this? And they actually told us that this is only happening to them because they are, in a sense, they didn't say it like that, but purer. Like, we don't fall to this, but the average person would. We are learned and this and that, and that's why we have the restraint not to fall into it. Other people will, and that's why business itself has an evil core in it, and you have to kind of give back after it, and it is something to be watched because it gets abused and all that stuff. So anyway, Art and I pulled back and like, okay, no. But then wouldn't you know it, years later, this was in the early 2000s, I came here like in 2012. Andrew brings me into CUA and I start to teach. And I was surprised in how Andrew was like, okay, have at it. I'm just give me, he gave me some directions that it had to be about my book. And I started and I wanted to tell stories. And one of the stories, of course, I started to tell is Art's story, because Art and I spent a lot of time. We became friends and we would hang out in the evening, and he would tell me his war stories about the business. And so I started to tell Art stories. And eventually I wrote it up. And then Andrew got a hold of it and says, hey, look, the way to do this in academia, if you write about somebody and the company still exists and everything, you need their permission for this. I'm saying, well, I'm not selling it. And he says, no, you need to ask him permission. So I, of course, after not having spoken to Art for a couple of years, reached out to Art and say, hey, Art, do you mind if I tell your story? And he says, no. And then he came to CUA and I made the case. And then at the end, it was like, 50, 60 students in the room. And then they say, okay, what should Art do? And this and that. And then what did he really do? And I said, you're in luck today, because that guy back there, that's Art Ciocca. And he got such a kick out of it. And so he comes down and we talk about this whole thing. And he's like, look, this has legs. I want to be a part of this. And so that's how the Ciocca Center started to be funded and founded, right? And before we taught these entrepreneurship classes, it was interesting that my office was next to Fred Sauté's office. And so the two of us, of course, both European, started to, associate with each other and started to both, have the same kind of idea about free markets and the Catholic social teaching, and how the two come together and creates a virtuous society. And so Luke and I, Fred and I started to sort of start this together. And then when we started the whole center, of course, I think it's very important to have, I've always have that it helps. It is very important to have an academic with us. Fred is a brilliant economist, and I think it's important to have him as our partner and to teach the practice and the theory in the same program.
What strikes me in that story, Andreas, is that you didn't pitch Art Ciocca with this specific idea of the Ciocca Center. We live in this pitching culture.
No.
You didn't go there with hat in hand with this master game plan. You just invited him, showed him hospitality, told the story, taught a good class, and it just happened from there. I think there's a lesson to be learned there. Sometimes the best things come out of starting with the relationship rather than the idea or the pitch, and just let the thing emerge organically.
It's just like in startups, you don't invest ever in ideas. You invest in people. And Art would say, okay, what are your plans? I want to support this, because he saw the beginning of our activities with the classes. He met everybody and so on. And he says, this can go places. If I give this rocket fuel, where are you going to take it? And that's when the idea came up with the with the venture lab, the incubator, the Rebecca fellowship. We had all kinds of things. And I have to also say, it's usually not what people put on the front page, but Art and I talked a lot about it. The failures. I had my theory was always this, and this is how you came into the picture, Luke. My theory, again, invest in people, not projects. Remember, Luke, when you came in, you don't have a job description. You're an entrepreneur in residence, and I've had like 5 people like you, where they come in and say, "You have nothing. I don't give you a job for a year. You get paid. You're here. Go around, kick every tire you can get involved in any class, in any project you want, and within a year, tell me what you want to do." we would never have had the seed program. We would never have Clooney. We would never have Wanting, in a sense, and your other books now, if this wasn't for the freedom of investing in the person to say, if I let Luke loose in here, God knows, you do more than I could ever expect.
What I heard was, Luke, get into trouble and make a ruckus and kick a lot of tires and see what you can do. And I mean, that's exciting for an entrepreneur to hear. You know, I mean, it's an entrepreneur.
Well, you helped right away. You jumped in with both feet into 118 and into everything else that we did. But very quickly, you started to see things you wanted to do. Today, you just got the award for the most innovative class, because I love to bring a team together that, on the one hand, and we have to also, I want to bring in Rebecca into this as well. On the one hand, I resonate with people who are in a sense similar to me, but on the other hand have completely different talents, right? And because then you can scale, like you become more than the sum of your parts. And
something that I think Art saw too was that the unique environment that at Catholic University and at the Bush School of Business, that as opposed to the other place, right, where, which is a well-known university in its own right, but to have people who are thinking about what can be done instead of thinking always in the mindset of what can't be done. Let me hold that thought just for a second, for a moment of station identification, sort of, and then we'll come back to it and talk a little bit more about how we're going into our 10th year. What is the Ciocca Center doing now from that kind of really cool beginning? This is Rebecca Teti, and I'm speaking with my colleagues Luke Burgis and Andreas Widmer about our work at the Entrepreneurship Center at the Bush School of Business. And if you like what you're hearing and you want to learn what we have to offer and learn more about how to support our work, then we ask you to visit us at cioccacenter.com. That's CIOCCA center.com. Or you can follow the link in the show notes that we'll provide. And by all means, of course, subscribe to Prosper and leave us a nice review. That really does help. It helps the algorithm gods put our content in front of other people like you, who are business professionals who are striving to live out their vocations in the workforce. And with that, we can go back to our wonderful conversation with my colleagues, Luke and Andreas.
When I joined in 2017, there was a handful of us. We were a small team. It felt like a startup. That's what was so exciting to me. And we did a few things, and we've grown the team. We've added a lot of programs and exciting ventures that didn't exist in 2017. So Andreas, can you talk a little bit about what we actually do? What's the lay of the land of the Ciocca Center in 2025?
So we are trying to establish what it means to practice principled entrepreneurship, and that is entrepreneurship that integrates the Catholic social teaching and the free market practices, bringing that together, which is not one of the things we're telling our students always, which isn't all about just starting a company or being or starting a new project. It is an attitude. It's an approach to life. Art Ciocca would always say that there's two ways to live life. One is as a creator and one is as a harvester. And if you can choose, always be the creator. That doesn't mean you never harvest, but your life approach is to be a creator, and that's how you behave. That is the core of what we're trying to teach. Now, many things fall out of that from that. So we teach a full entrepreneurship. We call it as co-specialization. I have to say the cool thing about being part of building a business school, which is like once in a lifetime. I couldn't refuse. Like I even moved to DC from Boston for this because this is so cool. So you get to decide things, like me saying, you know what? I don't think you should have an undergrad full degree in entrepreneurship. I think that's silly. Because undergrad is a ticket to get a good job and get your career going. And I think entrepreneurship should be something that everybody learns, that is an attitude. It's like what I just described. And so I advocated for that, and the team with Andrew agreed, okay, we're going to make entrepreneurship mandatory. So that's why our course is the entrepreneurship course is mandatory Every business student at Catholic University starts a business. That's the effect of the Ciocca Center, of saying, we want to teach the mindset. And then you can do a co-specialization, and we have all the courses for that, that both students who want to study entrepreneurship, but also others, many of them that you have, Luke, who don't study entrepreneurship, but they want to be exposed to this kind of thing. So we teach the full range of that. We also want to inspire students to become entrepreneurs of different kinds. We have a venture lab that is like an incubator, which we don't only focus on students. We also focus on Catholics in general, or people of goodwill to come and say we need help with this company and so on. We also focus on intellectual entrepreneurs. Fred leads this effort called the Rebecca Fellowship. Rebecca leads an effort called Novak Fellowship, where we try to, in a way, inspire intellectual entrepreneurship in this field of saying, how do you bring the free market kind of idea and Catholic social teaching together? I think I'm super happy with the election of Pope Leo. Not that it matters if I'm super happy or not, but let's maybe a better way to say is I'm super excited for the opportunity, because something is plaguing us all along, and that is this idea that it's an either or. In my search that I did after my experience there at the turn of the millennium of losing money, of losing my bearings and asking, is the free market really an evil thing? What I found is, no, it's not. Evil is, or people with evil intentions. That's the evil part of it. But the free market system is a great opportunity, a great way to create value for others. It's actually the easiest way, the most efficient way to create value for others. It depends it's almost like the software you have in your head, how you go about it, what you're trying to do. And that's, of course, then the Catholic conviction, the Christian conviction of Catholic social teaching, that is in a way the software that acts in there, the conscience, the morality, the thing that goes beyond the law. And I think that is a core part we're trying to teach. And a part of this that gets specific application. I know this is complex because it's a big circle. At the center of that circle is what we call enterprise solutions, and that is the distinction. I've been involved in emerging markets and aid, economic development for forever. One day it dawned on me that there is a difference between charity and development. Charity, aid, is something it's like the Good Samaritan that you do for a crisis. And a crisis, by definition, I learned in ministry, is time limited. That's a crisis. Otherwise, it's not a crisis. And so you do ministry different for somebody who's in crisis than somebody who's in a lifestyle that is not ideal, right? And so in the crisis, we do charity. We go in, we take over, we help, and it's like the hurricane, the earthquake, and all that kind of stuff. Lifestyle, which is an ongoing thing, is actually poverty. Poverty is not a crisis. Poverty is it's somebody who has that lifestyle, not by choice, but nobody has a negative lifestyle by choice, but it's something that is constant. A lifestyle you're not going to fix by by charity, because it's like a Band-Aid. It doesn't change the flywheel. Yeah. And most of all, you can fix it short term, but then charity, of course, goes away as soon as the economy goes down, and then you're back to square one. So there we need enterprise solutions that sustain themselves, that generate value for others, and most of all, that recognize the dignity of the human person, of the other person. Rebecca has one of my favorite sentences where she calls this, "You poor little," how do you say it?
Poor little dears. I
You poor little
can't stand
dears.
approaches to any problem that begin with the mindset of, "Oh, you poor little dears, let me come solve it for you."
Which is demeaning. And I've seen a lot of this, and I just think that in line with human dignity, in line with our call to be co-creators with God and everything, everybody ought to have access to these networks of productivity and exchange, to participate in the economy, in common life and all that. And I think that's one of the great contributions of Catholic social teaching, is to understand where the core issue is. that to be poor is not measured by how much money you have. It's measured by whether you have access to the means to create prosperity, right? To networks of productivity and exchange. And that, in a sense, is whenever you get access to that, that's entrepreneurship. And that doesn't always mean a new company, but it always means having that creator mindset, that imitation of God. And I think that's really at the core of our center. And that's why sometimes people think that we're very spread in different ways, but we're not. We're always on that creator image kind of outlook. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Yeah, we're trying to innovate again to change the flywheel of a situation like somebody in a cycle of poverty. Or we have this semester actually we worked with the Gabriel Network, who helps pregnant moms and have their babies and then reintegrate into society in a productive way for them. You know that, and the biggest challenge in teaching Catholic social teaching, especially in a business school, is actually that it's the same issue from two angles. People are used to in a business school to say, well, just tell me what the framework is, or tell me which it's like accounting, how to do it, and then I'll do it exactly. Well, that's not how Catholic social teaching is. From the church, people then expect to say, well, give me the 10 commandments, do this, don't do that, do this, do this. It's very direct. Well, that's not how Catholic social teaching is. Catholic social teaching, the best kept secret of our faith, is the framework of how to think. It's the mental model to think about that educates you and forms your conscience to think about how to think about a problem. Each one of the principles is an approach to analyze problems, which then leads to conclusions. And Catholic social teaching doesn't work without a decision-making human being, right? To say it needs to be mixed with conscience for it to actually then act. And in the class we're trying to teach is exactly this. Well, tell me about the how does this relate to subsidiarity? How do you approach this problem from that or that opportunity with that in mind? How would you put more subsidiarity into this? And this is not a it's not a how to shake and bake, just add this to it and it'll be done. But it's something that is again what inspires me so much is this co-creativity with God. That God doesn't sit there, no, that was not the right one, which pieces to move, but God is actually creative with you, or you with God. And that's the beauty of the Catholic social teaching, is that it's forever inspiring and so rich that I think this is something we can teach forever. But also I'm excited to see how Pope Leo is going to re-engage with it and apply it to some, and maybe there's some development in it, to some unknown territory, which in AI so far, we in social teaching, we didn't really have to say what is a person and what isn't a person. So
It's precisely why it's very relevant, though, to have this deep, rich anthropology of the human person
yeah, yeah.
to back up what we do. Andreas, say it, well, maybe, or I might flip it to Luke, because essentially what the Ciocca Center does is there are three prongs. We teach entrepreneurship to undergraduate students. We have this business incubator called Venture Lab that's for not only for our own students, but for alumni and for mission aligned businesses that helps people bring their products and services to market. And we have some, really cool businesses that we've worked with in that capacity. And then in addition, we try to get people who are actively involved in business at some level to think a little bit more deeply and to understand more deeply what their own engagement is, to understand it as more beautiful and to bring more beauty and delight into it and to find more meaning. And for that, we have all kinds of what you have called lifelong learning, right? The Bush School actually is recently freshly accredited, and we have a new MBA, and the Ciocca Center will be involved in the entrepreneurship elements of that MBA. But as well, we have, for example, you could find on our website on CioccaCenter.com, you could find the Gospel of Work free 8-part video series that's really beautifully done to talk a little bit about the meaning of work. And Luke, why don't we talk a little bit about Clooney from this angle? Because this is for, not so much directly for students, but for lifelong students.
Sure. Well, actually, before I say a word about Clooney, let me just step back and say we do a lot of things at the Ciocca Center, but I think we're really doing one thing, which is like the human person as a co-creator, the entrepreneur as a co-creator with God. And it just has different manifestations so that it can reach different audiences at the right time. So we have a program for high school students called the SEED program, which stands for Catholic Entrepreneurship and Design Experience, in dozens of Catholic high schools right now. And it's just taking what we always taught in our core vocation of business class and adapting it in a way that can deeply engage high school students. For instance, we give them a very small amount of money and we challenge them to make a meal for somebody else by asking the question, how may I serve you? What kind of food do you like? What are your dietary restrictions? And create a meal. Maybe they've never cooked in their entire lives, but it's a concrete way for them to apply the principles. We have a program for undergraduate students, many of them at other universities. This is probably the most intellectually forward thing that we do at the Ciocca Center, called the Rebecca Teti Fellowship Program, run by Dr. Fred Sauté, which marries the economics of William Rebecca, free market economics, with the Christian personalism of Wojtyła, John Paul II. So I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that. But again, just two different manifestations of the kind of core idea of what principled entrepreneurship is for different audiences. Rebecca mentioned the Clooney Project, which is a brand new project that I lead. And Clooney is a way to take what we do here and to try to, I think anthropology is at the core of what we do, right? We're trying to articulate an anthropological foundation for business and show how business can be a pathway to holiness. And the Clooney Project does that specifically by trying to unfragment the human person. We live in this very fragmented society where the people that are in Silicon Valley, some of the greatest innovators that we have had no real contact with faith traditions or with the academy, with the university. So we describe Clooney as bridging the gap between Athens, Jerusalem, and Silicon Valley, bringing core philosophical and theological ideas, moral frameworks, mental models like Catholic social teaching, right into the heart of some of the people doing great innovation. I really don't like to think of, what we do or the world having to be divided into Catholic entrepreneurs and then other entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
right? Or I'm not even quite sure what a Catholic entrepreneur is, right? It's like,
Right.
so we're just trying to reintegrate the way that people think about entrepreneurship, bring some of this rich heritage that we have in the Catholic intellectual tradition into places where people haven't normally received it. And we do it like the historical Abbey of Cluny, which was the most important Benedictine abbey in the Middle Ages, founded in 910, lasted for hundreds of years. And they were renowned for the beauty of the music, for their architecture. It was the biggest church in the world before St. Peter's was built. The beauty of the liturgy. So we try to marry all of this with a highly elevated aesthetic taste. We're trying to draw people in with beauty, so to speak, and then lead them into some of these discussions after that. And everything we do, I think, in Cluny, you'll see that. So it's Athens, Jerusalem, Silicon Valley, and Florence, if you will, and aesthetics and beauty truly
You
do
keep
matter.
adding cities.
I keep adding cities, yeah.
No, it's an amazing. I mean, Luke, this is an amazing thing. Say a word. I know we're going to run out of time soon, but I can't let you go without. Say a word about your new book, and isn't that coming out sometime soon, or are you even talking about that publicly, or what?
Man, I hate talking about books that I'm currently writing, because it really, really throws me off. But I'll say a word. No, it comes out, believe it or not, in a year. However, I have to submit the manuscript in 4 weeks. It literally takes 11 months from the time that I'm done writing until the time it's on shelf. So the book is called The One and the 99, and it's essentially about the relationship between individuals and groups. And the fundamental premise is that every human being has a drive to both differentiate themselves and to be in communion with others. We carry these two drives simultaneously within us. And I'll say this about the book: it's relatively easy to differentiate without being in communion. It's also relatively easy to be in communion superficially without people that are differentiated. It's really hard to achieve communion after differentiation and to allow people to differentiate. And that's what we would call covenantal pluralism, right? It's deeper than tolerance. It's freedom, responsibility, willing the good of the other, even when they're different. And that's what makes a healthy family. That's what makes a healthy society.
And that, my friend, is why this is not the first time or the second or the last time that you're on this podcast. This is just endlessly fascinating. But this was different. Next time, I'll be asking the questions because we're going to get further like that, Luke. Um, but yes, Luke, thanks so much for joining us, and also thank you for helping us tell our own story.
It's been a pleasure to have inserted myself into the story, and I hope we have many more years to write.
Luke, before we go, where can listeners find you and Cluny?
They can find me at lukeburgess.com. That's pretty easy. And then Cluny is at cluny.org.
Great. Well, we'll make sure to put all these things in the show notes, and of course the link to cioccacenter.com, in the hopes that all of you who are listening will explore there and discover what we have to offer, and whether or not you're a student or whether you're already in business, come find what we have to offer for you.
That is all, friends. As always, take care. Until next time, we hope you prosper.